Garcian. How long has it been?
What is this?
Why, this is the Lost and Gone podcast.
Welcome to Die!
Welcome. This is Grim, and I'm going to share with you a tale of what has never been and what could have been. Let us see what has never been. Walk down the hall with me and take a face from the ancient gallery. Let us begin with the story of Sunsoft. What started out as a simple manufacturer and vendor of electronic components branched out into the lucrative video game market. Their first two projects were released October 1978, and they were arcade games by the names of Block Challenger and Block Perfect. But where there is smoke, there is fire. In the 1980s, they had seen better success with their releases of Arabian, Ikai, and Kangaroo, all of which were published and made in-house.
One crying Johnny coming up!
However, Sunsoft wasn't content with merely making arcade titles and began developing games for home consoles. But their success in the former markets gave them the power to secure rights to publish and develop games for high-profile intellectual properties like Batman, the Addams Family, and later in the 90s, they mainly only ported Sega games onto Nintendo consoles, such as Fantasy Zone, Fantasy Zone 2, and Afterburner. But this of course means that like every star that has burned brightly, it didn't last. This is when the sun starts to set for the company during the year of 1995. It had become bankrupt and had to restructure its business as a whole. With Sunsoft's affinity for licensing big-name projects and having previously used big-name DC characters, it's only natural that eventually they would start making a Superman game as well. This is where the anecdotes of one man came to the forefront and described the troubled and problematic development of the Superman game, which later became Sunman. In an interview with someone going with the moniker of One Up, Kenji described a lot of his early life and work experiences. And he was well known before his death for making some of the most imaginative games of his time, such as Real Sound, which we will discuss later. However, Kenji Eno seems to have always had an affinity for making video games and music development, beginning his career with making a game for a regional game contest, which led him to a life of software development, video games, and making music. However, this is punctuated with pauses due to him dropping out of school and deciding instead to travel around Japan, until he overheard some of his neighbors who pondered how such a smart boy could go wrong.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
And how much sorrow he must have wrought his father. Widely regarded as a maverick for his avant-garde approach to video games, it's a shame that more people don't celebrate his name alongside the names of all the other great visionaries of the time. Not being one to be held down, Kenji started his own development company with his own money. This led him to create EIM, or Entertainment, Imagination, and Magnificence. What a mouthful. Which was a gaming development studio. In 1989, EIM were the makers of yet another cursed Superman project. Before we get into why Kenji was super, we gotta talk about the fate of EIM and Kenji's other dev teams. Kenji, being a tragic yet noble figure throughout his life, made many different games with many different dev teams. Some of which he created, some of which he didn't. The most important and critical to the story was EIM. However, he also founded Warp, later called Super Warp, and From Yellow to Orange. Well, let's start in reverse order and name some of his most magnificent titles. Well, From Yellow to Orange, he made You, Me, and the Cubes, which was released to the Nintendo Wii in 2009. Then with Warp or Super Warp, he made D1 for the Sega Saturn, 3DO, and the PlayStation in 1995. The next was Enemy Zero on the Sega Saturn in 1996. and then onto D2 for the Dreamcast in 1999, alongside the legendary Real Sound. Kaze no Regret, or Real Sound, The Winds of Regret, for the Sega Saturn. Now, with some background filled out, we could discuss Sunman. Kenji had successfully scored a contract with the larger publisher and developer, which was Sunsoft. With his dev team EIM, Kenji in the aforementioned interview also explained that he founded EIM to get away from having to develop others' visions, and wanted to work on original ideas and characters, which meant that he also had to sell his team on these pitches too. And not being into something he wanted to do himself, it was rather difficult, and seemed to have affected him emotionally. This, however, is in sharp contrast to how he seemed to enjoy making his signature game, Real Sound, which featured a unique item on its launch day, which was a packet of seeds. In another game called Shortwave, which was also produced by him, he also included a variety pack of condoms. But let's continue on with Real Sound. The game is meant to be accessible to blind people and plays out as a radio drama. Released in 1997 for the Saturn and 2 years later in 1999 for the Dreamcast, it was made for his blind fans who appreciated his games and wrote him letters of gratitude. There is much to be said here, but Kenji having the pull that he did gave Sega exclusive rights to the game in exchange for Sega to donate 1,000 Sega Saturn consoles to blind people in Japan. Now let's calculate just how much money that would be then and now. Since this is quite a few years after the launch of the Saturn, we can say it to be somewhere around $400 per console, and multiply that times 1,000, and you get $400,000 as a rough estimate. But through inflation, it's a much different and awe-inspiring number. $400 in 97 to 2024 is $774. Now, let's do the math again. Good lord, that's $774,000. Now, these are rough ballpark estimates, but close enough. But now let's talk about the Kryptonian in the room. When developing Superman before it became Sunman, it was subject to the rules of the IP holders, and one of the stipulations mentioned by Kenji was that they weren't allowed to let Superman die or become damaged, meaning there was no way to really make a fun or functional game. This culminated in the project getting terminated, and during the restructuring of the company, many were laid off, and skeleton crews were left to develop key projects. One of these was Sunman, reusing a lot of the assets previously set for the Superman game, except for some of the iconic Superman sprites. However, someone out there on the internet was able to make a ROM hack that restored all of the original Superman textures and abilities, which makes the game more enjoyable. However, taken on its own, Sunman was better left to memory. If you gaze long enough into the abyss, it gazes back, and you may just end up fundamentally scarred from the nightmare of this unreleased NES game. Now, I will say that this game could have been amazing if more care was put into it. Starting off in the first stage, you will see a very buff guy running with a V-neck style boiler suit, until they change into Sunman magically, with this red suit with a soft orange undertone on the sides, and damn, look at those biceps. Now, admittedly, he looks pretty super, kinda just like Superman. Now, we must talk about the dual nature of this game. For a side-scrolling beat-em-up, you sure have to pick and choose when to run away from fights, because most enemies have guns and can fly, whereas you only have a short, stubby punch. However, by pressing up at any time, you can fly without much fanfare. It's best used to bypass almost all enemies, which is very needed because there is no way to replenish your health. Except on the chase stages, you can use laser vision, and it sure comes in handy because you've pissed off some helicopter and they want to turn you into a fine blood paste. Not unlike when you harass a boat trying to get away from you and it desperately throws bombs that break apart in a tri-shot fashion. Anyhow, there's not much to be said about the first level. It's in some city somewhere, rather unremarkable, beating up scuba thieves with gargoyle wings and robotic scissors. Then you follow a cry for help up a skyscraper fighting more scuba thieves, except now they have homing missiles that shoot out of MP40s. But I'm gonna give you a pro gamer tip here. Fly around and ignore as many Steves as you can while you're flying for your life. Then, some helicopter gets mad at you and proceeds to attack you with more missiles and flybys. But that's alright. You have laser vision.
Supervision.
Shoot the copter until it experiences turbulence, and you just fly away into the sunset. Now you see your first stage clear, with an epic action shot of Sunman mid-stride with Great Sunman. But it's not any great. It's a great, as in sewer grate. Next, you're flying in the Grand Canyon, fighting even more scuba thieves. And some even have UFOs that they pilot. But yet again, avoid them all you can. Fighting is futile, and your life will end all too soon. Afterwards, you end up in a cave, and ready to get crushed by some green crystals, and even yet, more and more scuba thieves, now in white. At the end, Sunman starts to turn like he's Zangief from Street Fighter, with the prompt telling you to press a button, and away he goes. Then he somehow drills into the ground, revealing a secret underground rocket. Gotta win the space race and stop those damn communists from claiming it. Punch and dent up the rocket as quick as you can, because the more damage it takes, the more turrets come and shoot you. Now, you're on to the Rocky Mountains Railroad, and boy, do you hit this train hard after flying past all the enemies. However, there is a tunnel where you get ambushed by axe-wielding androids who jump to their death, and as long as you don't touch them, they fall to their doom. Then, you gotta stop the speeding train, and yet again, you gotta push a button as fast as you can to stop the train before the distance meter reaches 0. And after another great, you're ready to go on to the Spectre on Battlecruiser? What kind of name is that? But now, be ready to be waylaid by spiky ball turrets, more scuba thieves, spinning wild cranes, and buff armadillo guys who just sit around planking all day like Solid Snake. I'm not gonna lie here. This level is damn near impossible, and you just have to try and avoid everything by flying through it and hoping to God you're not on your last life. Then the boat blows up, and you gotta catch a glitchy speedboat that is also a nigh impossible task. The occupants throw out flashing soccer balls that split into projectiles and will absolutely catch you every time. The only way to live through this is to shoot the balls with a Z before they blow up. Then, you have a brief window to use your laser eyes while dodging mines thrown at you. Boom! The boat goes up and another great. Now, on to the final stage, Spectre's hideout. Chase Spectre to the dead end and defeat him, it says. His hideout was filled with ceiling traps, laser turrets, flying frogmen, and honestly, it's super cool. However, the fun comes when you enter the flying part, and it's actually really fun. And there's grates opening and closing, but watch out, if you hit anything, you lose a lot of health. Then, you see your arch nemesis at the bottom, Spectre. And he's a total pushover. Although he is a cool looking dude, he kinda looks like a purple Magneto and teleports to different spots to pose real cool and uses powers of magnetism. His attacks are pretty cool looking, and he rains down metallic bits, shoots out magnetic pulses, and just repeats those two things. The secret to win this duel is to punch him before his attacks go off, and be careful that you don't fly into him, because you could still get hurt pretty easily. Keep punching him until he explodes and dies. Then Sunman flies past the Statue of Liberty in a forest, and then finally, you get the best end screen ever. the world returns to a peaceful time, now and forever. Then, it transitions to an end credit screen with a view of Earth from space, with only 8 planets around it. This game predicted the fucking future. Well, looks like it's my favorite part. The end. Special thanks to my lovely lady Melissa for the love and support. This wouldn't be my podcast without a shout out to the late but great Ray Bradbury. Also, my obligatory shout out to my fellow thick boys Toby Von Doom and Goobs of the Secret Levels podcast. Give them a listen and you might just learn why we don't touch things that are blue. That's all I got for this one, and I hope you're doing well out there in this wild, wild world. Goodbye, everyone.